Welcome to the Electronic Village Tech Fairs for 2021. I'm here with Jennifer Lacroix and Catherine Clemens to talk about making your LMS work for you, lessons learned and effective practices. Both of them have posted videos on the Call IS page, specifically about what they've done with LMSs. And we're going to have a brief discussion about some different ways that they've used LMSs to help their English learners. I'm first going to give each one of them a chance. First, I'm going to give each one of them a chance to introduce themselves again and just briefly summarize what they talked about in their video, and then we'll move into our discussion. So how about Catherine first?
Thanks, Aaron. So this is my presentation was about a project I did last summer. I was working as an EL specialist for the U.S. Department of State, teaching or doing teacher training to students in Mexico. And the students they'd already graduated from a 2-year program called Access, which teaches basic English skills. And after this 2-year program, they were eligible to do some teacher training. So maybe they would like to become English teachers as well. And due to the pandemic, the teacher training class was offered online. And so they asked what sort of interest there was. The Department of State thought that they would probably get 25 or 30 people signing up, and instead they got 100. So over the course of summer of 2020, I taught a 5-week course to 100 different students throughout Mexico. And we used Google Classroom for this. And I had never used Google Classroom before. I've used, I've used Canvas, I've used Moodle and Blackboard, but never considered Google Classroom. And it worked great. I was just thrilled with all of its affordances for this group. And these are students throughout Mexico, some low bandwidth situations, people sharing devices, people having intermittent internet availability. And I have to say that I was thrilled with how well it turned out. And so if any of you are considering using this free, widely available tool of Google Classroom for something rather sophisticated like teacher training, and we did micro teaching. The students created they created lesson plans together. They did a lot of work together online collaboratively. It worked great. So that's my elevator pitch for Google Classroom, and
Great.
I'll answer more questions about it later. So
okay, great. Jennifer, can you tell us about your project?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Jennifer Lacroix. I teach at Boston University in our Global Programs department. And within Global Programs, we have several students from around the world who are all international students looking to become fully matriculated either at the undergraduate or graduate level. So they typically come to us at the Center for English Language and Orientation Programs, otherwise known as CELOP, for anywhere from 6 weeks to 12 weeks to 18 months, depending on their motivation or depending on where they are in terms of English language development. So this past semester, I had the opportunity to work with a rather small group of just 4 students in a low intermediate reading and writing class. I had 4 males, some of whom were first language L1 Arabic speakers, some of whom were L1 Chinese speakers, and one who was an L1 Vietnamese speaker. So my goal was to try to explicitly raise awareness around the role that prosody plays in our listening as well as speaking. And although it was a reading and writing class, I wanted to raise this awareness by looking at the poetry of Amanda Gorman. Amanda Gorman, of course, a very well-known poet now. She just gave the reading at the presidential inauguration. So we spent quite a bit of time learning background information about Amanda Gorman. And the technology that I used was Blackboard as the learning platform. And within Blackboard, I used a new feature called perusal. Perusal is great because it allows you to upload documents and students can annotate the documents, and they can also work collaboratively, meaning the students can interact with each other as they're reading, and I can also see where the students' questions are. So we used perusal as a tool to highlight areas where words needed to be extra stressed, meaning they were louder, longer, higher, and clearer. And students could also ask questions, and we used color coding and annotating skills, and I could answer their questions. And then over time, we listened to Amanda Gorman giving her speech, and then the students practiced using the same level of prosody that Gorman uses, where she has a lot of high dips, fall rise contours in her speech that seems extra dramatic for our international students, and they can feel self-conscious or they can have a lack of awareness. And as we know, especially students from some language backgrounds, they tend to be a little bit flatter in their intonation patterns. So this was enhanced by using voice memo. Voice memo is a feature you can use on your iPhone, and they could speak themselves, they could speak their recording directly into the phone and send it to me via email or upload it to Blackboard. And what's nice about voice memo is you can actually see the pitch patterns and the decihertz. So I could upload these on a PowerPoint screen, and students could actually see what Gorman's prosody looked like visually and what their prosody looked like visually. And they could compare and contrast, and they could actually see where their contours were much flatter, or they could see where they had longer dips and hesitation. So I thought this was a very successful opportunity to work with online forums, because we're doing everything so remotely.
Yeah.
There are things I would change about it if I were to do it again, but it was a good little pilot project for me.
Okay. I have a question for both of you then about the two LMSs that you used in your specific projects. To what extent was your project, or your students' participation in your project, synchronous or asynchronous? Like, did you have a lot of meetings that in both projects? Did you have a lot of meetings where everybody was kind of meeting as a group and using the LMS in some way? Or was that more done asynchronously? Whatever comments you have about that would be great.
So
Go ahead.
thanks, thank you. So our class was almost entirely synchronous. It was designed so that the students would have very little homework, but we met for 6 hours a week. And so a lot of the class was, I would lecture for a bit, I would provide background information, and sometimes students would read articles together and then discuss the articles. And yes, it was all synchronous. And so the students would work together on Google Classroom. Well, they used the whole Google suite. So they would be working in real time on Google Docs, so to create their lesson plan, and they would also be on Zoom at the same time. So they would be working and writing. And I used Zoom because I have a Zoom account, but people who are interested in this could also use Google Meet. Google Hangouts would work just as well for the synchronous part of a project like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually, because I know that's part of kind of the package of Google Classroom is you get Google Meet as well. Yeah.
And the students really enjoyed this because, like I said, they were spread out throughout Mexico, and yet they were thrilled to work with their colleagues who were in different parts of the country. So it was a real time for them to have community building, and also have me as the teacher just available to moderate and help as needed, but really the work and the knowledge building was all them.
Okay, great. Okay, Jennifer, any comments about the synchronicity or asynchronicity of your classroom?
Yeah, no, sure. It was very similar, it sounds like, to Catherine's experience. I was using Zoom as well, but I think any platform would work. And like I said before, I was using Blackboard. So Blackboard is nice because they could access the material asynchronously. That means they could review things outside of class. They could spend time in perusal with the reading and the annotation. So most of their annotating with the reading was done asynchronously. Also, I was teaching in an LFA, Learn from Anywhere model at BU. That meant 3 days a week I was on campus. Half the students were in the room with me. The other half were signing in remotely from their independent countries around the world. So the time difference was a major thing for us. So we tried to have our class really early in the morning so that students, say in China, were still able to access the class even though it was in the evening for them, with a 12-hour difference typically. And then there were things that we did synchronously in terms of giving instruction, asking questions, practicing the reading so that I could give them corrective feedback in vivo. So what we know about corrective feedback is that it's very effective if it's happens in the moment, if it's immediate feedback. And I use a lot of meta-linguistic cues so I could see them on the Zoom and I could let them know past tense or future or more rise. So in our practice sessions, I was able to use my hands and communicate a lot of that meta-linguistic corrective feedback to help them with their ability to read the poetry more um, with more supersegmental stress contours.
Mhm.
And I was able to give them that feedback in the training process and that formative for that formative feedback that they were receiving from me, which of course was not graded. That was just, I don't grade the formative assessments that I give them on
Mhm.
feedback. But in the end, their end product was to see if how well they could read the same stanza of the poem that Amanda Gorman did. And then again, they could see in the voice memo how they did and if their prosody contours had shifted. So if I were to do it again, I would do more of a pre and a post. I would really have them read the poem on the first day of the class. And I would do the intensive training throughout. And then I would, sorry, I've got another call going on in the other room.
Mhm.
And then I would do another kind of summative post at the end to see if I could measure and see them visually side by side, compare the beginning of the training to the end of the training to see if they could see a major difference in their prosody or not.
And that was part of the perusal, the features of perusal?
No, that was using voice memo in terms of
Oh,
the
okay.
recording. I use the voice memo thread from iPhone that they have. It's
Mhm.
a free recording device, but I think you could use, um, there are other voice memo or not voice memo, but voice recording features out there that you can
Yeah.
use to, you can
Yeah.
actually see your recordings. They use them a lot in like phonetics classes or phonology, applied linguistics courses.
Okay. Jennifer, I had a follow-up question
Mhm,
about your students' use of Blackboard.
mhm.
I know that Catherine had mentioned how Google Classroom was so like accessible to her learners. It was very easy for them to get on it. Did you have any kind of barriers to entry or any difficulties with your students using Blackboard or getting logged into Blackboard or the features or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. It's something brand new for most international students. And like I said, this was a low intermediate course. Some of them are a little more advanced than low intermediate. I would say they were more at the B level than the A level. So I had a mixture of A1, A2, and B1 and B2 students all in the same class. So it was a pooled class. And so, of course, the B level students were a little quicker with some navigating. I usually send a welcome introduction video before the first day of class, where I use Zoom just to record, hello, this is who I am. Sometimes I make a short movie, an iMovie. I upload a bunch of pictures about my personal life and I welcome the students by this introduction video. I send it out so they know who I am, where I'm from, what I like to do outside of work. I try to make it very personalized and it's just like a 1 minute, 2 minutes at the most, like video clip. So I send this in the Blackboard announcements as an attachment, this welcome introduction video, but I also give them explicit links on how to access Blackboard. Of course, the first week, it's a lot of finessing. It's a lot of showing them and navigating and showing my screen. I show them in my screen by sharing the screen on Zoom how to access Blackboard and which buttons to push. And this took a lot of time. Of course, I had to model this a lot in the first few days that we were together. Some students, like always, are a little more savvy and grasp this really quickly and right away. Others, it took well over a week to get them fully adapted to the platform and able to post things to discussion board or understanding how to submit an assignment so that they could get feedback from me in a grade via the assignment tab. And that takes some finessing. That always does with new students. But usually after the first week, everything is up and running and, fingers crossed, relatively smooth sailing.
Catherine, kind of a follow-up to that, you said you were experienced with several different learning management systems and you were very happy with the performance of Google Classroom. Could you discuss kind of the student perspective in getting set up on Google Classroom and kind of the initial onboarding and training?
Sure. So the reason I chose Google Classroom was because it's free and because students likely already had familiarity with it, and also because, most importantly, it's available into perpetuity. So because this was a teacher training class, I wanted the students to be able to access the materials in the future. And I worried that if I used Canvas or Moodle, that something that was institutional, then when the students moved on in their lives, they wouldn't be able to go back and access their lesson plans. So we went with Google Classroom, and I wrote to students ahead of time, and I told them that if they didn't have a Google account, they needed to get a free Google account. But I would say that about 75% of the students already had Google accounts. They hadn't used Google Classroom before, but it is so intuitive. It's made for K-12 and it's just very easy to figure out. In fact, the biggest problem I had was that a lot of the students already had these Google accounts that they'd had for several years. So then when I signed on, I was looking at these student names. It's like, well, who's the big dog? And it's like, no, this is your handle from a few years ago. And so that was actually a learning opportunity to talk to the students about, you're now a teacher in training, you're no longer a student, you need to get a professional Google account and maybe change these nicknames and change this avatar that's from the past. So to answer your question, students found it very easy to figure out.
Great, thank you. We only have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to go back to Jennifer really quick and ask specifically about the Perusal app, whether it was something that your institution provided for you, made it part of the Blackboard package, or whether it's something that other people in higher ed might have access to, and any other comments you have about that particular function of Blackboard.
Sure. So it is the Blackboard Ultra that I'm using now, and it is the learning platform that Boston University tends to use across the campus. I also teach in the School of Education. I teach a research methods course to graduate students, which I've been teaching for about 6 years now, and we've always used Blackboard. And even prior to that, we were using Blackboard for blended learning in flipped classrooms. So it is something that our institution has purchased or worked out an agreement with. And Perusal is a new tool. It's a new feature that's embedded in Blackboard, and at least in the Blackboard Ultra account that they provide to me. So I'm not sure if it's something you can purchase independently outside Blackboard platform or not. I would imagine you can, because I think it's its own registered trademark. That's something I'd have to research and follow up with you on, Erin. But it was not something I received explicit training on from my university. It was something that I played with in my own time, and I'm still playing with to figure out what all the features are. But it's nice because you can create your own library. So what's hard sometimes for us as language instructors is, how do we mix adapted materials, say, that comes from the textbook versus more authentic materials. And
Mhm.
teachers often say they have a challenge finding the right authentic materials to use, or how do they scaffold those authentic materials for their learners. It's a time zap for them. They don't have time to do all the pre-reading of the material and to pull
Mhm.
out the vocabulary to pre-teach and to create their own comprehension questions. So I didn't use it in that same way that one might historically use authentic readings. I was using it as a totally different kind of tool. So I was uploading in Perusal via the library the document that I wanted the students to work with. And Perusal is nice because you can track how many annotations a student does. You can interact by making a comment. You can answer each other's questions. So if a student had a vocabulary question, we were using a color coding system. We would use green for unfamiliar vocabulary, red for a thesis statement or main idea, and other colors if you had a question or this was an area I didn't understand. But I could highlight an area. I could say, what is this vocabulary word? And if someone knew the answer, they could respond to my question in Perusal. So it was a very interactive way of reading, which is not typically something that we interactively do other than a read out loud or a comment or a paraphrase of a reading. This is
Would you
really,
say it's
really
similar to
useful.
Google Docs in the way it operates?
It is, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
similar to Google Docs, only it is similar, but there's a lot more interaction in terms
Mhm.
of the electronic tool. It's much more sophisticated in terms of
Okay.
the level of feedback you can give one another
Mhm.
and the types of comments and how you make them. You can also track everything. So it's like a grade book. It can be linked. So
Mhm.
I can say, this is your assignment. I want each student to make a minimum of, say, 7 annotations. And I want this done by Sunday at 5. And it will actually let me know of how much of that did the students get done. Did they get 25% of that assignment done or 50%? It will actually measure that for me and tell me what percentage of the assignment they completed.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
thank
pretty
you both
cool.
for
Yeah.
sharing. We are about out of time that we
Mhm.
have for this event. So so I appreciate you both sharing the projects that you've done and the different ways that LMSs have worked into them.
Mhm.
And yeah, thank you very much for attending. And
Great.
for those of you that are watching, you can see the links to various Call IS things that are going on in conjunction with the 2021 conference.
Great.
I'm Have a great day.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
Erin.
Erin.
All
Thanks,
right,
Thanks,
Kathy.
Jennifer.
bye.
Okay. Have a
Bye-bye.
great day. Bye-bye.